The Body Knows, episode 24, The Nervous System in Sex and Love. Welcome back to The Body Knows. In the last episode, we explored boundaries as the body's speech, the nervous system's way of saying yes and no. Boundaries are not just rules we impose with words. They are sensations, contractions, and expansions that keep us safe and allow intimacy to be authentic. But what happens when those yeses and nos are tested in our most vulnerable moments? When the body is not just touching the world, but touching another person, or being touched in return? Sex, love, and the nervous system. This is where the nervous system signals become even more profound. Sex and love are not abstract concepts. They are full-body experiences. They involve skin and breath, hormones and heartbeats, memory and imagination. And because of that, they are never just about pleasure. They are about safety. They are about whether the body feels able to relax into presence, or whether it must brace, contract, or leave altogether. Intimacy as vulnerability. To be intimate with another person is to open the deepest layers of the self. It is to say without words, here I am, unarmored. Will you meet me? Will you honor me? That question is not asked in the prefrontal cortex alone, the thinking brain that constructs ideas and makes plans. It is asked in the limbic system, in the vagus nerve, in the subtle contractions of the diaphragm, and in the way the skin shivers at a touch. This is why intimacy can feel both deeply healing and deeply threatening. On one level, it promises closeness, bonding, joy, and even transcendence. On another, it carries the risk of rejection, shame, exploitation, or re-traumatization. The nervous system cannot ignore those risks. It has been shaped by everything we've lived through before. It remembers the moments when touch was not safe, when openness was mocked, when closeness led to betrayal. So when we step into intimacy, we are never stepping into a blank slate. We are bringing with us the echoes of our past experiences, the embodied scripts we inherited in childhood, the cultural stories we've absorbed about sex, gender, and love. Scenario: dissociation during intimacy. Let's take a simple but profound scenario. Two partners are together and intimacy begins. The body is touched, arousal stirs, but suddenly one partner feels far away. Their body is still there, but their mind has gone blank. They are not fully present. They are going through the motions, but they are disconnected. This is dissociation during intimacy, and it is more common than most people realize. On the outside, it might look like withdrawal, disinterest, or even coldness. On the inside, it is often a survival strategy. The nervous system has detected danger, not always danger in the present moment, but danger remembered, danger anticipated. A smell, a phrase, a tone of voice, or even the simple vulnerability of being seen so closely may trigger a collapse. When dissociation occurs, it is not because the person is broken, frigid, or uncaring. It is because the body has decided that leaving, withdrawing inward, shutting down sensations, is safer than staying fully exposed. The nervous system, shaped by history, has chosen survival over presence. Sex as a nervous system event. One of the great misunderstandings of modern culture is to treat sex as a purely physical act, something about friction, performance, climax. But neuroscience and lived experience show us otherwise. Sex is a full nervous system event. Arousal requires parasympathetic activation, the relaxation response that allows blood flow, lubrication, expansion, and openness. Orgasm requires a delicate interplay between sympathetic arousal, the build-up of tension, and parasympathetic release, the letting go. Bonding after sex is mediated by oxytocin and dopamine, hormones that flood the system when safety is present. But none of this can happen freely if the nervous system is in danger mode. If the amygdala signals threat, the prefrontal cortex loses clarity, the vagus nerve shifts the body into shutdown or hypervigilance, and arousal collapses. This is why sex cannot be separated from safety. Why can love not be separated from trust? Intimacy is never just about desire. It is about whether the body feels able to stay present. Why love and fear live side by side? It might sound paradoxical, but the nervous system holds love and fear side by side. To love is to risk. To attach is to open the possibility of loss. To surrender to pleasure is to give up control, if only for a moment. This is why many people find intimacy both alluring and terrifying. On one level, we long for closeness, for touch, for union. On another, we fear being hurt, abandoned, rejected, or consumed. The nervous system feels both truths at once. In fact, this push-pull dynamic is the heart of intimacy. Desire draws us closer, fear pulls us back. The dance is not a flaw, but a feature. The question is not how to eliminate fear, but how to create enough safety that fear does not dominate, that presence remains possible. Cultural distortions of intimacy. Our culture does not make this easy. We live in a world where sex is commodified, where performance is emphasized over presence, where shame is layered on top of desire. From purity cultures that frame sex as dangerous and sinful, to pornified cultures that reduce intimacy to mechanics, we are given distorted maps of what love and sex should be. These distortions exacerbate nervous system conflict. If you grow up being told that desire is shameful, your body may respond with guilt every time arousal stirs. If you grow up being shown that intimacy is a performance, your nervous system may collapse under the pressure to meet external expectations. What gets lost in all of this is the simple truth: intimacy is about presence. It is about two nervous systems meeting, listening, and co-regulating. It is not about how it looks from the outside, but about how it feels from within. The nervous system, as the teacher of love, when we look at intimacy through the lens of the nervous system, a profound shift occurs. Instead of asking, am I good enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I performing enough? We begin to ask, am I present? Am I safe? Am I listening to my body and the body of the other? This is a very different orientation. It does not dismiss desire, but it roots desire in connection rather than performance. It does not ignore fear, but it recognizes fear as part of intimacy's landscape, a signal to slow down, to breathe, to renegotiate, not as a flaw to be erased. In this way, the nervous system becomes our greatest teacher of love. It reminds us that intimacy is not a contract of perfection, but a practice of presence. It reminds us that to be touched is to be vulnerable, and that vulnerability requires safety, personal reflection, safety and rejection. In my own life, I've seen how the nervous system shapes intimacy in ways I didn't always understand at the time. I've always been a tactile person. Touch matters to me. It's one of the ways I connect most deeply. But I also know what it feels like when that touch becomes unsafe, when someone who has hurt me tries to reach for me, and my body rejects it instantly. It's not about withholding or punishing. It's about protection. Once hurt has entered the space, touch does not soothe. It reinforces the wound. I've felt that recoil, the tightening of the body, the refusal to be softened by hands that just inflicted pain. In the past, I might have tried to override this reaction, telling myself to be forgiving, to keep the peace, to avoid conflict. But doing that only deepened the pain. Now I see it differently. My body's refusal is wisdom. It is not a sign of coldness, but of clarity. And this recognition has reshaped how I approach intimacy. I no longer ignore the body's signals. I no longer collapse into someone else's desire when it conflicts with my safety. I honor the nervous system's truth, even when it is inconvenient, even when it challenges the scripts of romance. A new story of intimacy, so perhaps the task before us is to rewrite the story of intimacy altogether. Instead of seeing sex and love as something we achieve, perform, or conquer, we can see them as conversations between nervous systems. In this story, dissociation is not failure, it is feedback. Fear is not sabotage, it is a signal. Boundaries are not rejection, they are the foundation of trust. Pleasure is not a goal to chase, it is the byproduct of presence. This new story is not about perfection, it is about honesty. It is about showing up as we are, listening to the body, respecting the signals, and trusting that true intimacy can only grow where safety is honored. This is where we begin in this episode, with the nervous system as the ground of sex and love. From here, we'll move into the biology of arousal and safety, the role of trauma and shame, the influence of attachment patterns, and the practices that allow us to reclaim embodied intimacy. Intimacy is not just about finding the right person or performing the right moves. It is about learning to stay present in the body, to trust its signals, and to create spaces where two nervous systems can meet without fear. Only then can sex and love become what they were meant to be. Not performances or prisons, but acts of connection, healing, and presence. The biology of arousal and safety. If intimacy begins with presence, then its foundation lies in biology. To understand why sex and love can feel like both sanctuary and battlefield, we have to descend beneath the level of words, beneath cultural scripts, and into the physiology of the body. Because the truth is this: arousal and safety are inseparable. You cannot fully experience one without the other. For decades, society has tried to split the two apart. Media and porn culture often frame sex as raw animal drive, friction, climax, and conquest, as though safety, trust, and vulnerability were irrelevant distractions. Conversely, some strands of religion and moralism frame love as pure safety without desire, as though the erotic were a threat to intimacy rather than part of its fabric. But the nervous system tells a different story. Arousal, desire, and bonding only flourish when the body feels safe. Remove that safety, and everything collapses. The parasympathetic invitation to even begin the process of arousal, the body requires activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch associated with rest, digestion, and relaxation. Think of it as the body's permission slip to open. Blood flow to sexual organs increases, lubrication begins, and muscles soften. This is not the work of sheer willpower or imagination alone. It is physiology. But here's the paradox. Arousal also requires sympathetic activation. There needs to be energy, anticipation, and tension. Too much parasympathetic calm and desire may remain dormant. Too much sympathetic arousal and anxiety override pleasure. True intimacy emerges in the delicate dance between these two states: relaxation and excitement, surrender and activation. The vagus nerve plays a central role here. Running from the brainstem down into the chest and gut, it modulates heart rate, digestion, and emotional regulation. When vagal tone is strong, the body can shift fluidly between arousal and rest. When it is weak, intimacy becomes unstable. one moment flooded with excitement, the next overwhelmed with fear or numbness. Hormones of bonding and betrayal. Sex is not just about nerve pathways, it is a hormonal symphony. Dopamine fuels desire and anticipation. It is the spark that drives us toward pleasure. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, floods during orgasm and cuddling, creating feelings of closeness and trust. Norepinephrine heightens alertness and focus, sharpening arousal. Prolactin rises post-orgasm, contributing to satiety and bonding. But hormones are not neutral chemicals. They are deeply context-dependent. If intimacy occurs in a space of trust, oxytocin and dopamine strengthen the connection. If it occurs in a space of coercion or betrayal, those same hormones can cement trauma, binding the memory of abuse into the nervous system. This is why survivors often feel both bonded to and terrified of their abusers. Their biology was hijacked by a false promise of safety. Ario, when safety collapses, imagine this. Two people are together, sharing intimacy. The moment is tender, the body begins to respond. But then something small happens, a word spoken harshly, a glance that feels dismissive, a memory stirred by a smell. Suddenly, the nervous system detects danger. Blood flow retreats, lubrication halts, and erection fades. Muscles tighten, breath becomes shallow. The body that moments ago was softening into pleasure now braces against threat. From the outside, this might look like rejection or disinterest. Inside, it is the nervous system screaming, I do not feel safe enough to stay open. This collapse is not voluntary. No one chooses to shut down arousal. It is a protective reflex, the body prioritizing survival over intimacy. And here lies the key. Intimacy cannot be demanded. It can only be invited. The body decides whether the conditions of safety are sufficient. Trauma's fingerprints on arousal. For survivors of trauma, this delicate balance between arousal and safety is even more precarious. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, is often hyperreactive. The hippocampus, which normally places memories in chronological context, can misfire, flooding the present with echoes of the past. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates impulses and makes sense of experience, may go offline under stress. The result? A smell, a phrase, or even the simple act of being touched can send the body spiraling into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. For some, arousal becomes entangled with danger. Their bodies respond sexually to situations that also feel threatening, creating confusion and shame. For others, arousal collapses altogether as the nervous system refuses to risk vulnerability. Neither response is chosen. Both are survival adaptations. But unless they are understood, they can feel like personal failures, reinforcing shame and deepening the wound. Why does performance collapse in the presence? Cultural narratives make this even harder. In a world where sex is often treated as performance, many people learn to override their body's signals to meet expectations. They push through discomfort, fake arousal, or dissociate to avoid conflict. This creates a vicious cycle. The more the body is ignored, the more it learns that its signals don't matter. The more it learns that, the less safe it feels. And without safety, arousal collapses. This is why so many people describe sex as going through the motions. Their bodies are present, but their nervous systems are not. The dissociation is not apathy. It is self-protection against a culture that demands performance over presence. Personal reflection, touch and rejection. I've seen this pattern in my own life. As I shared earlier, I'm tactile. Touch matters deeply to me. But when safety collapses, when someone who has hurt me tries to touch me, my body refuses. I recoil. It's not that I don't value connection. It's that the nervous system has linked that person's touch with pain. In the past, I might have forced myself to override this reaction, telling myself to forgive, to stay, to keep the peace. But every time I did, I betrayed myself. My body was screaming no, and I ignored it. The cost was immense, a collapse of self-worth, a sense of being erased. Now I see it differently. My body's refuel is wisdom. It is not rejection of love, but protection of truth. By honoring that, I reclaim not only my safety, but my ability to experience genuine intimacy. The biology of consent. This is why consent cannot be reduced to words. Saying yes with the mouth while the body contracts in fear is not true consent. Consent must be embodied. The body must be able to relax, expand, and soften. Without that, intimacy becomes performance or coercion, not connection. Neuroscience supports this. When the body is under threat, cortisol spikes, narrowing perception and heightening vigilance. Oxytocin cannot do its bonding work in the presence of cortisol overload. Love hormones and stress hormones do not coexist easily. True intimacy, then, requires not just agreement but safety. The nervous system must feel protected enough to let down its guard. Only then can arousal and love unfold. Why safety is not negotiable. Perhaps the most radical truth here is also the simplest. Safety is not negotiable. You cannot shame or argue a body into feeling safe. You cannot demand arousal where the nervous system detects threat. You cannot override biology with insistence. What you can do is cultivate conditions of trust. Slow down, honor boundaries, listen to signals. Allow space for vulnerability. This is not a weakness, it is a strength. It is how intimacy becomes sustainable, how love becomes a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. So when we talk about the biology of arousal and safety, we are not talking about abstract science. We are talking about the very foundation of intimacy, the parasympathetic invitation to soften, a hormonal symphony that bonds or betrays. The survival reflexes shut down pleasure when danger appears. Understanding this changes everything. It reminds us that intimacy cannot be forced, performed, or demanded. It must be invited, created, nurtured. It must be rooted in safety. Only then can the nervous system allow arousal to unfold, not as performance, but as presence. And this brings us to the next layer. What happens when trauma and shame collide with intimacy? How dissociation becomes the nervous system's survival strategy, and how culture deepens the silence around it. Trauma, shame, and sexual dissociation opening. When desire collapses in real-time intimacy is often imagined as seamless, a smooth flow of desire, touch, and connection. But real intimacy is rarely that linear. Sometimes it falters. Words get spoken, glances land wrong, memories stir, and the nervous system suddenly changes state. A desire that felt alive a moment ago can vanish. What once felt warm can suddenly feel unsafe. I've lived this. I remember a moment when I was intimate with someone, the atmosphere charged, my body beginning to soften into presence. And then something was said, not shouted, not cruel on the surface, but piercing in a way I can't fully describe. The effect was immediate. My desire dried up. My body wanted nothing more than to turn away and sleep. It wasn't rational. It wasn't a matter of choice. It was my nervous system shutting down, self-protection firing faster than I could think. I could barely muster a few words to explain. From the outside, it might have looked like withdrawal or rejection. From the inside, it was the collapse of safety. This is the paradox of intimacy. Our deepest longings and our deepest wounds live in the same place. When intimacy brushes against unresolved pain, the body does what it must to survive. And one of its most powerful strategies is dissociation. Dissociation as survival dissociation, in clinical terms, is a disconnection from present experience. It can show up as feeling detached from your body, depersonalization, from your surroundings, derealization, or from memory itself, gaps, fog, numbness. But in the context of intimacy, dissociation is rarely clinical. It is primal. The body senses danger, not always external, sometimes internal, memory-driven, and pulls the plug on presence. Pleasure becomes impossible, not because the desire was false, but because the body refuses to risk further harm. Neuroscience explains why. When the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, detects threat, it can override the prefrontal cortex, rational thought, and shut down the hippocampus, memory sequencing. Cortisol floods the body, narrowing focus, tightening muscles, and draining blood flow from the genitals. The parasympathetic nervous system, required for arousal, collapses. Dissociation steps in to protect the self. This is not a weakness, it is survival. But shame often follows. Shame because we couldn't go through with it. Shame because we turned away. Shame because our partner didn't understand. Shame because intimacy, which we long for, became yet another reminder of pain. The weight of words. The scenario I described, the desire to shut down after something was said, shows how fragile safety and intimacy can be. Words are not just sounds. They carry emotional weight, echoes of past wounds, associations our conscious minds can't always trace. A single phrase can land like a slap, stirring memories of rejection, betrayal, or criticism. For someone carrying trauma, the nervous system does not distinguish between past and present. It reacts as though the original wound is happening again. And because arousal requires safety, the entire system collapses. In my case, I could feel flashbacks flying through my mind in those seconds. Old conversations, old wounds, all replaying at once. It wasn't just this partner's words, it was every time I had been unseen, misjudged, and rejected. The body carried all of that into the present. Projection in intimacy. Over time, I've realized that many of the accusations I faced in relationships were not really about me. I was accused of only wanting sex, of being a player, of talking to others behind someone's back. Yet inside myself, I knew my truth. I wasn't interested in casual games. I wanted an authentic connection. I wanted relationships that built slowly, naturally, without coercion. At first, I took these accusations to heart. I wondered if I was doing something wrong, if I was somehow misleading people. But as I learned more about projection, in therapy, in study, and through my own self-awareness, I came to see it differently. Projection is when someone attributes their own feelings, fears, or desires to another person. A partner who fears abandonment may accuse you of planning to leave. A partner wrestling with their own sexuality may accuse you of being unfaithful. A partner who feels objectified may accuse you of objectifying them. It is their own wound speaking, not your actions. In relationships, projection is incredibly powerful because it masquerades as truth. When someone says, "You only want me for sex," it can land as fact, especially if you already fear being misunderstood. But often, as I've come to see, such phrases are unconscious admissions. They reveal the speaker's own truth. They are viewing the relationship through a primarily sexual lens, or they fear they are unworthy of deeper love. When accusation becomes erasure. One of the most painful dynamics I've experienced is when projection becomes erased, when your truth is not only disbelieved but replaced by someone else's narrative. I remember being with a partner who accused me of speaking to others behind their back. In reality, I was spending hours alone, immersed in deep research and writing. I was building the very foundations of the work I share now. But to them, my solitude looked like betrayal. They couldn't see me as I was. They could only see me through the lens of their past wound, their ex-partner leaving them after 20 years. At first, I defended myself, explained, and reassured. But eventually, the constant accusations eroded my trust in them. I wasn't just dealing with suspicion. I was dealing with the collapse of recognition. To not be seen for who you are, especially by someone you love, is a slow kind of death. This is where dissociation creeps in again. When you are continually misseen, continually accused, continually projected upon, the body begins to retreat. It says, if I can't be seen, at least I can protect myself by disconnecting. The cost is intimacy, shame, sexuality, and cultural silence. It's important to see how culture amplifies these patterns. On the one hand, modern culture is hypersexualized. Bodies are commodified, intimacy is marketed, and pornographic ideals are normalized. On the other hand, culture shames authentic sexual expression, especially when it doesn't conform to rigid scripts. This double bind breeds shame. If you desire, you are too much. If you withdraw, you are cold. If you want a connection without sex, you are confused. If you want sex within love, you are boring. There is no safe place to land. For survivors of trauma, this cultural silence is even more suffocating. Dissociation during intimacy is rarely discussed openly. People don't know that shutting down is a nervous system reflex. Instead, they interpret it as rejection, frigidity, or apathy. This deepens shame and isolates those who are already struggling. Trauma bonding and sexual dissociation. We also have to acknowledge how dissociation can be weaponized in cycles of abuse. Narcissists, sociopaths, and those with dark triad traits often manipulate intimacy to destabilize their partners. They alternate between love bombing and withdrawal, praise and criticism, passion and coldness. This inconsistency keeps the nervous system in a state of hypervigilance. The partner learns to dissociate as a way of surviving the roller coaster. Sex becomes not a space of connection but a battlefield of power, a place where the body is both used and erased. Here lies one of trauma's cruelest tricks. The very hormones meant to bond us, oxytocin, dopamine, can bind us to our abusers. Dissociation then becomes the only escape hatch. My realization, safety first. What I have learned through all of this is that safety must come first. Not safety in the abstract, not safety as a vague idea, but embodied safety. Does my body relax in this person's presence? Do I feel free to say no without fear? Do I feel seen for who I am, not who they project me to be? If the answer is no, intimacy becomes impossible. If the answer is yes, intimacy becomes a sanctuary. It took me years to accept this. In the past, I would push past my body's signals, telling myself to give more chances, to endure discomfort, to prove my commitment. But that only deepened the wound. Now I act in real time. If someone's actions show a lack of respect or love, I no longer ignore it. I no longer sacrifice my safety for the illusion of connection. Dissociation in intimacy is not a failure of love. It is the body's way of saying, I do not feel safe enough to stay open. Trauma, shame, and projection all play into this, but at its core, dissociation is survival. The challenge and the opportunity is to hear that survival not as the end of intimacy, but as a guide to where healing is needed, where boundaries must be drawn, where projections must be named, where authenticity must be restored. Because intimacy without safety is not intimacy at all, and the body in its wisdom refuses to pretend otherwise. Our attachment shapes intimacy. Every relationship carries two stories. The story we tell ourselves about who we are, and the story our nervous system has been carrying since childhood. We may imagine we are entering intimacy as adults, free and self-determining. But more often than not, we enter intimacy with scripts written long before we were conscious of them. Attachment theory offers a language for these scripts. Developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, attachment theory shows how the way we were cared for as children, consistently, inconsistently, or neglectfully, shapes how we seek closeness as adults. An infant soothed when crying grows into an adult who expects comfort in love. An infant met with silence or punishment grows into an adult who both longs for and fears intimacy. But these are not just psychological ideas. They live in the body. When a partner is silent, the nervous system of someone with anxious attachment may light up with abandonment fear. When a partner grows too close, the nervous system of someone with avoidant attachment may sound alarms of suffocation. Our patterns of intimacy are nervous system patterns, embodied scripts written in flesh and neurons. Scripts and projections, I know this personally. In my relationships, I have often been accused of things that did not reflect my reality. Accusations like, you only want sex, or you're a player, or you must be speaking to other people behind my back. At first, I doubted myself. Was I giving off the wrong impression? Was I somehow untrustworthy? But in time, I realized these accusations were not truly about me. They were projections, my partners placing their own fears, insecurities, and wounds onto me. Projection is one of the nervous system's oldest defense strategies. When the inner experience is too overwhelming to face, the psyche disowns it and casts it outward. I feel unworthy becomes, you make me feel unworthy. I'm afraid of betrayal becomes, you are betraying me. Projection temporarily reduces inner anxiety, but at the cost of misseeing others. When this happens in intimacy, it is devastating. To be accused of motives you don't hold, to be unseen for who you truly are, is a form of erasure. It creates a painful double bind. Defend yourself and risk further accusation, or stay silent and swallow the wound. Either way, the nervous system pays the price. The pain of being misseen. One of the hardest experiences in my adult life was being with someone who accused me of betrayal while I was spending hours in solitude, immersed in research, study, and creative work, healing, and understanding myself at a deeper level. I was building the foundations of what would become my public projects, my writing, my presentations, and my life coaching. But to them, my silence looked like secrecy. My focus looked like disinterest. My solitude looked like infidelity. The accusations weren't random. This partner had been left by their previous spouse after nearly 20 years. Their wound was raw, unresolved. Their nervous system was tuned to expect abandonment, betrayal, loss. In their eyes, they weren't accusing me of what I was doing. They were reliving what had already happened to them. I could understand this empathically. I could see their pain, but empathy alone does not erase the damage. Living under constant projection chipped away at my trust in them. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. It was that they couldn't see me. And intimacy without recognition is not intimacy at all. Attachment meets trauma. This is where attachment theory meets trauma. Attachment wounds are not only about childhood. They are reactivated in adult relationships, often with more intensity than we expect. A harsh word can feel like a parental scolding. A delayed reply can feel like abandonment. A partner's distraction can feel like betrayal. When these wounds are not healed, they manifest as projection, accusation, or withdrawal. And when both partners carry unresolved scripts, intimacy becomes a battlefield of nervous systems rather than a sanctuary of hearts. I have seen this in myself too. In the past, I was more likely to ignore my own discomfort, to push past red flags, to try to make things work, even when my body was telling me otherwise. I thought time would heal, that patience would bridge the gap. But what I didn't see then was that time doesn't erase scripts, it deepens them. Every time I let someone cross a boundary, every time I ignored my own, no, I reinforced the belief that my needs didn't matter. Systemic abuse and the misshaping of intimacy. It is important to zoom out here. These aren't just personal dynamics. They are systemic. Society conditions us to misshape boundaries and intimacy. Schools teach compliance, not consent. Media floods us with hypersexualized images while shaming real desire. Religion often moralizes boundaries, teaching self-sacrifice over self-respect. Gender norms tell men to pursue and women to yield, creating distorted scripts of dominance and submission. Even diagnosis and psychiatry, as I've argued elsewhere, can become part of this conditioning. Labels like bipolar, autistic, or ADHD pathologize difference rather than recognizing it as diversity. They teach us to see ourselves as broken rather than wounded, disordered rather than adaptive. This too erodes intimacy, because when you see yourself as flawed, it becomes harder to believe you are worthy of love. In this sense, projection and accusation in relationships are not random. They are extensions of systemic abuse. When someone accuses you of being a player or only wanting sex, they are not only projecting their wound, they are repeating cultural scripts that vilify desire, misinterpret confidence, and distort connection. Scenario: when scripts collide, imagine this. Two people meet and feel an immediate spark. Conversation flows, laughter comes easily. There's attraction, but also a sense of genuine connection. For one of them, intimacy feels like it could grow slowly, naturally, without pressure. For the other, past wounds are stirring already. One night, the more wounded partner says, "You only want me for sex." They say it not because it's true, but because it echoes what they fear. The first partner feels tension rise in their body. They know the words aren't accurate, but they feel powerless to prove their sincerity. In the past, they might have become frustrated and angry at not being seen. But now, with more awareness, they notice what is happening. They breathe, ground themselves, and recognize this is projection. This isn't about me. This is about their wound. Intimacy falters, desire cools. But instead of collapsing into shame or defensiveness, the first partner withdraws with clarity. They recognize that authentic connection cannot grow in the soil of projection. This scenario mirrors countless real experiences, my own included, and it shows how intimacy scripts are not just private dynamics. They are embodied dramas of trauma, attachment, and culture playing out in every nervous system. Toward secure intimacy, The good news is that these scripts are not destiny. Attachment research shows that even those with anxious or avoidant patterns can move towards secure attachment. The key is awareness and practice. Awareness of one's own triggers. Awareness of projections. Awareness of when the body is saying yes or no. And practice in respecting those signals, even when it costs comfort. For me, this has meant acting in real time. No longer ignoring my body's signals. No longer giving endless chances to people who cannot respect me. No longer sacrificing my authenticity to keep the peace. I have learned that it is better to walk away early than to stay in cycles of erasure and projection. This doesn't make intimacy easy, but it makes it real. Secure intimacy is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about being seen and seeing. It is about recognizing that the nervous system of love carries both desire and fear, and that the work of intimacy is to build spaces where both can be held safely. Attachment, trauma, and projection intertwine in every intimate relationship. They are not flaws, but patterns, scripts written in nervous systems doing their best to survive. But survival is not enough. To truly love, we must rewrite these scripts. We must see projection for what it is. We must honor our own needs instead of erasing them. We must create intimacy that feels like safety, not accusation. Because intimacy without recognition is emptiness. But intimacy with recognition, intimacy where both nervous systems can breathe, where both stories can be seen, is nothing less than sacred. Reflections on reclaiming embodiment in sexual connection intimacy is where the nervous system is most naked. Not just the body, but the whole history carried inside it. In the act of closeness, everything surfaces. Desire, fear, shame, memory, and projection. And yet, this is also where healing can take root. Because sex is not only about pleasure, it is about presence. It is about being embodied, fully inhabiting one's own skin, and allowing connection without collapse. Why embodiment matters in sex and love reclaiming embodiment in sexual connection is not simple, especially after trauma, projection, and years of disconnection. For me, the journey has been long, difficult, and often painful. But it has also revealed a truth I now hold on to. Intimacy that is embodied, conscious, and grounded in authenticity is not only possible, it is transformative. This part is not about abstract ideas. It is about lived reality. The stories, lessons, and reflections I share are not confessions, but maps, signposts for anyone who has felt intimacy fracture under projection, for anyone who has felt dissociation replace desire, for anyone who has wondered if love could ever be safe. When words break the body's flow, I remember a night where desire was alive. The closeness was real, the connection flowing. But then words were spoken, words that pierced through me, dismantling the fragile sense of safety I had built in that moment. Instantly, my desire dried up, my body turned cold. All I wanted to do was turn away. It was not about rejecting the person. It was about my body recognizing that safety had been ruptured. My nervous system had been pulled out of arousal into withdrawal. My voice could only manage a few words. I don't want to carry on. What I could not articulate then, but can name now, is that my nervous system had shut the door. This is the physiology of dissociation in intimacy. The vagus nerve, once in ventral activation, safety, connection, arousal, shifted downward into shutdown. Cortisol spiked, oxytocin evaporated. My body could not fake intimacy. It could only protect itself by pulling away. This is why embodiment matters, because the body cannot lie. You can tell yourself you are fine, that you should continue, that you owe it to your partner, but the body will tell the truth. And the truth is often uncomfortable. The projection trap beyond the body's physiology. There is the psychology of intimacy. Again and again, I have been accused of motives that were not mine. You only want sex. Or not serious. You must be seeing others. These accusations hit hard. They cut through trust, creating fractures where none existed. They made me feel unseen, misjudged, and erased. It took me years to understand this was not about me. These were projections, defense mechanisms, as Freud once described, and as countless theorists have elaborated. What could not be faced within was displaced outward. A partner who feared betrayal accused me of betrayal. A partner ashamed of their own desire accused me of objectifying them. Projection in sex and love is devastating because it weaponizes the very thing we crave most, recognition. Intimacy is meant to be a mirror where we are seen. But under projection, intimacy becomes a distortion, a carnival mirror that reflects not your truth but another's fear. Being misseen as a player. One of the most painful projections I faced was being accused of being a player. Why? Because I carried self-confidence, because I knew who I was, because I was comfortable in my own body. Confidence was misinterpreted as manipulation. Certainty was reframed as deceit. At the time, I tried to defend myself, to explain, but defense never works against projection. The more I spoke, the less I was heard. Now I see this differently. To be misseen says less about who I am and more about what the other cannot yet face. Their accusations reveal their own lens, shaped by past betrayal, by cultural scripts, by wounds still bleeding. And yet, the impact is real. To be called a player when your heart longs for depth is wounding. To be accused of using someone when all you want is a connection is erasing. It teaches the body to brace, to expect accusation, to withdraw even when desire is there. When work was mistaken for betrayal, another memory stands out. In the years when I was immersing myself in research, study, and building the work that would become the Inversiverse, the body knows, and more, I spent long hours alone in my room. I was reading, writing, watching seminars, and integrating knowledge. It was a time of growth and creation. But to my partner at the time, this solitude looked like secrecy. My commitment to study looked like a distance. My silence looked like betrayal. They began accusing me of speaking to others behind their back. They insisted I must be hiding something. No matter how much I reassured them, the accusations did not stop. It wasn't my actions they were responding to. It was their past wound, the abandonment they had experienced from a previous partner after 2 decades together. Their nervous system was replaying an old script, and I had become the stage. At first, I tried to explain. I told them I loved them, that my work did not mean disinterest. But the explanation could not touch the projection. Over time, the erosion of trust broke me down. I began to feel unseen in the very place intimacy should have made me visible. The systemic layer. It's important to recognize how culture and systems feed these dynamics. Our society weaponizes sex and intimacy. The media floods us with hypersexualized images, creating unrealistic expectations. Religion moralizes desire, teaching shame instead of embodiment. Schools rarely teach consent as a lived bodily practice, reducing it to rules rather than sensations. Psychiatry often pathologizes difference, labeling those who feel intensely or differently as disordered. In this context, projections like "you only want sex" are not personal accidents. They are cultural scripts. They are rehearsed lines in a drama that society keeps running. When someone accuses me of being a player, they are not just speaking from their wound. They are speaking from centuries of narratives about masculinity, sexuality, and control. Understanding this helped me. It showed me that intimacy is never just about 2 people. It is about 2 nervous systems colliding in a world full of scripts, expectations, and projections. Choosing authentic connection. Despite all of this, I remain committed to authentic connection. I no longer chase intimacy at any cost. I no longer ignore red flags or override my own discomfort. I now know that intimacy must be chosen with care. It must be mutual, embodied, and rooted in presence. Casual encounters, I learned through experience, are often more wounding than fulfilling. They leave both parties emptier, reinforcing the scripts of shame and projection. For me, it has to be the right person. Not perfect, not flawless, but present. Someone willing to see me as I am and to be seen as they are. This isn't about idealism. It is about survival. The nervous system cannot thrive in intimacy built on projection, accusation, or shame. It needs safety, respect, and authenticity. Without these, desire collapses, dissociation creeps in, and connection turns to pain. Healing through awareness. The journey of reclaiming embodiment in intimacy has been about awareness. Awareness of my body's signals, when desire rises, when it shuts down, when tension replaces openness. Awareness of projections, recognizing when accusations say more about the accuser than about me. Awareness of cultural scripts, seeing how society distorts intimacy and learning to resist those distortions. This awareness has given me freedom. I no longer feel trapped in the double binds of projection. I no longer stay silent when my body says no. I no longer accept intimacy that erases me. Instead, I hold on to embodiment, breath, grounding presence, desire that is chosen, not coerced, connection that is mutual, not assumed. Closing reflections. The body as teacher looking back. I see how much I once ignored my body. I stayed in relationships that eroded me. I tolerated accusations that wounded me. I allowed desire to be overruled by guilt, fear, or obligation. But the body never forgot. It always told the truth. Desire drying up mid-act. Withdrawal under projection. Fatigue after accusation. Each of these was my nervous system's way of saying, this is not safety, this is not love. Now I listen. I honor my body as teacher, not enemy. I see intimacy not as performance, but as presence. I understand that the nervous system is not a barrier to love, but its compass. And in reclaiming embodiment in sex and love, I have reclaimed myself. The double bind, pleasure and pain. One of the most disorienting experiences survivors of trauma often speak about is how what should feel like pleasure can suddenly collapse into pain, shame, or fear. This is the double bind of intimacy. The very closeness we long for, the touch we crave, the surrender we yearn to give, becomes the same context that activates the body's deepest memories of danger. In this bind, love and fear are not opposites, they are twins, tangled together in the nervous system. The nervous system, after all, has no moral compass. It does not know whether the hand that reaches for us is a friend or a foe, a partner in safety or a partner in betrayal. It reads sensation, context, memory, and threat cues. When those have been shaped by earlier experiences of coercion, neglect, or violation, the nervous system often treats intimacy as a battlefield rather than a sanctuary. While love can feel like danger, at the biological level, arousal and fear share overlapping pathways. Heart rate accelerates, breath deepens, adrenaline surges. In both sex and fear, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. This overlap explains why the line between desire and panic can blur. The body, primed by past trauma, may mistake the rise of arousal for the rise of threat. Neuroscientists studying PTSD and sexual trauma survivors have shown that the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, lights up even during consensual intimacy if the body perceives cues that once accompanied danger. A certain tone of voice, the smell of cologne, the way a partner shifts their weight on the bed, any of these can serve as a reminder to the survival brain. In that moment, pleasure becomes unbearable. It isn't that the person doesn't want closeness. It's that the nervous system cannot separate then from now. The body reads the present as a repetition of the past. Pleasure as a trigger. For many, what complicates this further is that the very experience of pleasure itself can be a trigger. Deep joy, release, or surrender may feel unsafe because historically, moments of openness were followed by betrayal. Imagine a child who laughed freely only to be mocked. Imagine a teenager who trusted a kiss only to be violated. Imagine an adult who finally lets their guard down only to be abandoned. Over time, the nervous system learns a bitter lesson. If I feel good, danger is coming next. Pleasure becomes paired with pain. Safety becomes paired with collapse. This conditioning explains why some people experience flashbacks during sex, not of images or explicit memories, but of body states. The trembling that should signal orgasm becomes indistinguishable from the trembling of fear. The increased heartbeat of arousal feels identical to the increased heartbeat of panic. Pleasure itself becomes coded as unsafe, the shutdown response. When this happens, the nervous system often takes the safest path it knows, shut down. The dorsal branch of the vagus nerve pulls the body into stillness. Desire vanishes. The person may go numb, space out, or leave their body even while the act continues. From the outside, this can look like withdrawal, rejection, or coldness. Inside, it is survival. The body is saying, this is too much. To stay safe, I must disappear. The tragedy here is that dissociation often goes unnoticed. Partners may misinterpret it as consent or compliance, when in reality it is the absence of both. Survivors often blame themselves afterwards. Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I stop it? Not realizing that silence and stillness were the only possible moves available to their nervous system at the time. Cultural layers of shame. The double bind is not only biological, but also cultural. Societies that silence conversations about sex, that stigmatize survivors, that glorify performance over authenticity, deepen the shame. In many cultures, sex is framed either as duty or conquest. Women are told to please, men are told to perform. Vulnerability is rarely spoken of. In this context, when dissociation or collapse occurs, the person often internalizes the problem. Something is wrong with me. I'm broken. I can't love properly. But the truth is different. The body is not broken. It is protective. It is wise. It remembers what the conscious mind may have long buried. And until safety is restored, it will always choose survival over surrender. Personal reflections. I have lived this bind myself. There were moments in intimacy where, instead of being drawn closer, I felt myself pulled away. Words spoken in what should have been tenderness shut me down completely. Desire drained out of me. I turned away, barely able to explain, my body desperate for distance and sleep. At other times, I found myself accused of being interested in sex, when all I longed for was connection. Women I cared for projected onto me. You only want me for one thing. In reality, I desired to build something authentic, to let attraction grow naturally, to arrive at intimacy without coercion. These accusations were painful, not because I doubted myself, but because they showed me how deeply wounded we are as a culture around sex. Projection, psychology's name for attributing one's own feelings to another, was at play. What they feared in themselves, they laid at my feet. What they could not reconcile in their own desires, they accused me of embodying. Looking back, I see the layers. My ex-partner once accused me of talking to others behind their back when I was simply alone in another room, doing work, deep in study, pouring hours into research. They saw betrayal where there was only commitment. They carried the pain of their own abandonment, and I became the screen onto which their fears were projected. These moments hurt, they eroded trust. But they also taught me how much our nervous systems speak louder than our words. Their accusations weren't about me. They were about the wounds they carried. And my reactions weren't just about them. They were about the echoes of my own past. Philosophical views of the double bind. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Pleasure, too, can feel like that. Dizzying, destabilizing, opening us to freedom. For those carrying trauma, that freedom feels like falling. In Buddhism, desire is often framed as a source of suffering, not because desire itself is evil, but because of the grasping, the clinging, the fear of loss attached to it. In the trauma survivor, this clinging is not abstract. It is visceral. The very act of wanting someone can feel like a risk too great to take. Modern psychology echoes these insights. Trauma researchers describe approach avoidance conflict, where the same stimulus, intimacy, simultaneously activates both longing and fear. The closer we get, the louder the alarm sounds. The push-pull becomes unbearable. And the way through. The way out of the double bind is not to force pleasure or suppress fear, but to honor both. The body must be taught gently and slowly that safety and pleasure can coexist. That desire need not be punished. That surrender can be met with care, not betrayal. This teaching cannot happen in the abstract. It must happen in lived moments, through breath, grounding, presence, and trust. It happens when partners listen not just to words, but to silences, not just to movement, but to stillness. It happens when one person says, "I see you pulling away, let's pause," and the other feels relief flood their body. The double bind of pleasure and pain is not a sign of brokenness. It is the mark of a body that has survived. It is the scar tissue of the nervous system holding on until safety can be assured. When survivors begin to reclaim intimacy, the bind slowly loosens. Pleasure is no longer followed by punishment. Desire is no longer paired with danger. The nervous system, once a prison of loops, begins to trust that joy can exist without collapse. This is the work of love, to create spaces where bodies can relearn what was once forgotten, to walk slowly enough for fear to catch up, and gently enough for pleasure to remain. To know that wholeness does not mean never being triggered, but knowing that even in the trigger, safety can be restored. Reclaiming embodied intimacy. To speak of reclaiming intimacy is to speak of returning home. Home is not just a place, or even a person, but a state of being inside the body. For those of us who have lived through trauma, intimacy can feel like the most foreign country of all. The body becomes a site of vigilance rather than rest, a place of shutdown rather than openness. And yet, within the very tissues of the nervous system lies the possibility of another map, a way back to embodied connection, to touch and closeness not as danger but as safety. The reclamation of intimacy is not achieved through force. It is not about trying harder or performing at the level of some imagined standard. It is not about overcoming shame by pushing through it. To reclaim intimacy is instead to practice slowness, honesty, and presence. It is to listen to the microsignals of the body, breath, pulse, tension, softening, and to treat them as guides rather than obstacles. Why patience heals faster in cultures obsessed with performance. Speed often dominates the language of sex. Faster, harder, more, but the nervous system cannot be rushed into safety. Safety is learned only through repetition of gentleness. Just as a skittish animal must be approached with care, so too must the traumatized body. Patients with progressive slow movement heal faster because it creates space for the nervous system to register what is happening in real time. When arousal builds gradually, the body has time to distinguish excitement from fear, desire from danger. Breath can remain steady, awareness can stay online, and the amygdala does not need to flood the system with alarms. One of the most powerful practices here is simply pausing. To pause during intimacy is not to break the connection, but to deepen it. In the pause, one can ask, how do I feel right now? Do I want to keep going? What part of me is saying yes, and what part is saying no? These questions bring the body back into dialogue, reminding us that intimacy is not a performance, but a conversation. Naming sensations in real-time language is one of the greatest tools for reclaiming intimacy, not in the form of scripts or expectations, but as a practice of naming sensations as they arise. For example, I notice my breath tightening. I feel warmth in my chest. My shoulders are tensing. Such naming does not require explanation or justification. It is not about defending why one feels what one feels. It is simply about being witnessed. When sensations are spoken aloud, they are no longer trapped in the body. They move into the shared space between partners, where they can be held with care. This practice also disrupts the cycle of dissociation. Dissociation thrives in silence, in the absence of communication. By naming even the smallest sensations, the person stays tethered to the present moment. The body says, I am here and I am noticing. Building safety rituals. Another way to reclaim intimacy is through the creation of rituals. Rituals may sound formal, but in reality they are simple practices repeated with intention. They signal to the nervous system, this is safe, this is familiar, this is ours. A safety ritual can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths together before intimacy, holding hands and maintaining eye contact for a minute, agreeing on a phrase or gesture that means pause or stop, sharing one thing each partner feels grateful for in the moment. These rituals are not distractions from intimacy, they are its foundations. They create predictability, and predictability is the soil in which safety grows. For survivors whose histories often include unpredictability and betrayal, rituals offer a profound sense of grounding. Healing through play. One of the forgotten dimensions of intimacy is play. Trauma often strips the body of spontaneity, replacing it with hypervigilance. Everything becomes serious, fraught, weighted with meaning. Reclaiming play is therefore a radical act of healing. Play can look like laughter, teasing, role play, and gentle experimentation. It is not about perfection, but about curiosity. When partners allow themselves to be playful, the nervous system shifts from survival to exploration. Dopamine and oxytocin rise, stress hormones fall, and intimacy becomes not a test but a dance. For many survivors, rediscovering play in intimacy is life-changing. It breaks the association between touch and duty, between desire and danger. It reminds the body that connection can be joyful, silly, even messy, and still safe. Listening with more than ears, reclaiming intimacy, also means learning to listen in ways that go beyond words. The nervous system speaks through posture, breath, and micro-movements. A partner turning slightly away, a hand going limp, eyes losing focus. These are signals as loud as any spoken sentence. To listen with more than ears is to attune to these signals and respond with care. It is to slow down when one notices withdrawal, to ask softly, "Are you here with me?" It is to treat silence not as consent but as information. This kind of listening transforms intimacy from a one-sided act into a shared practice of attention. Both partners become custodians of each other's safety, co-regulating through subtle adjustments. Personal reflections. When I think about reclaiming intimacy in my own life, I remember the times I laughed quietly to myself in situations that once would have triggered me. Instead of lashing out, I breathed deeply, stayed grounded, and allowed the tension to pass. That shift did not happen overnight. It came after years of learning to listen to my body, to notice when I was withdrawing, to name what I felt without shame. I also recall how important it has been to separate projection from truth. When accused of being interested only in sex, I no longer took the bait of defending myself endlessly. Instead, I understood that the words were a reflection of the other person's fear, not of my reality. That insight allowed me to stay present, to protect my own integrity, and to walk away when necessary. For me, reclaiming intimacy has meant reclaiming my own voice. It has meant knowing that I can stop when I need to, laugh when I want to, and say yes when I mean it. It has meant discovering that true desire arises not from pressure, but from presence. Practices for everyday life. To bring all of this together, here are some practical ways anyone can begin reclaiming embodied intimacy. 1. Breath awareness. Before, during, and after intimacy, notice your breath. Is it shallow, rushed, or steady? Breathe deeply to signal safety. 2. Body scanning. Gently move attention through your body. Where is there tension? Where is there openness? Share one sensation with your partner. 3. Safe words and gestures. Agree on clear signals that mean pause or stop. Honor them without hesitation. 4. Post-intimacy reflection. After closeness, take time to talk or journal about how you felt. Did you stay present? Did anything trigger you? Did anything surprise you? 5. Playful exploration. Introduce lightness into intimacy. Experiment. Take the pressure off. 6. Gratitude ritual. Share one thing you appreciated about the connection. This rewires the nervous system to associate intimacy with safety and joy. Reclaiming embodied intimacy is not about erasing the past. It is about teaching the body that the present can be different. It is about recognizing that survival strategies like dissociation once kept us alive, but that now, in moments of true safety, they are no longer necessary. This reclamation is slow work, but it is sacred. Each breath, each pause, each moment of laughter is a small victory. Over time, these victories accumulate, and the nervous system learns a new truth. Intimacy is not a battlefield, but a sanctuary. Spiritual and cultural perspectives. When we talk about sex and love, most of us are used to hearing it described in terms of psychology, culture, or biology. We talk about hormones and neurotransmitters, about Freud or attachment styles, about social norms and expectations. All of those have their place. But beneath them, alongside them, and sometimes in tension with them, lies another way of seeing intimacy, as a spiritual and cultural phenomenon, where the body becomes not only the stage but the instrument of union. It is here that the conversation about masculinity and femininity, archetypes and energies, alchemy and divine union begins to make sense, not in abstract theory alone, but in the nervous system itself. Because what cultures across history have intuited, whether in Tantra, Taoism, indigenous ceremony, or mystical traditions, is that love and attraction are not just mental games or social contracts. They are energetic encounters, nervous system to nervous system, soul to soul. And when they align, the body knows. Masculine and feminine as archetypes. Let's begin with the archetypes. In Jungian psychology, in Tantra, in Taoist philosophy, we encounter the idea of masculine and feminine not as gender roles, but as universal principles. Masculinity is often associated with consciousness, direction, clarity, and the riverbank. Femininity with flow, receptivity, creation, the water itself. Both exist in every person, regardless of gender. And intimacy, at its most alive, is described as the dance of these forces, the alchemy of their meeting. When you experience attraction that feels undeniable, it's often because these polarities have been activated. One person stands more on the riverbank, the other in the water. One provides grounding, the other flows. It's not static. These roles can shift, merge, or invert. But the dynamic tension between them creates a charge that the nervous system recognizes instantly. What's fascinating is how this aligns with neuroscience. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory describes how our nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety, resonance, or danger. When we encounter someone whose energy complements our own, whose voice tone, facial expressions, and body language signal harmony, our body often floods with calm, even as attraction sparks. This duality of calm and charge is what spiritual traditions call union, simultaneously grounded and alive. Attraction as alchemical union. In alchemical texts, the union of opposites is the key to transformation. In Tantra, the meeting of Shiva, consciousness, and Shakti, energy, is the birth of creation itself. These metaphors are poetic, but they also map onto lived bodily experience. When you meet someone whose presence awakens you, it feels like more than chemistry. It feels like recognition. For decades, I have struggled to explain this. The push and pull of attraction, the confusion when someone's words didn't match their energy, the hurt of being misseen or projected upon. But after awakening, that moment when my shadow became visible, when the patterns I'd missed before suddenly illuminated themselves, what once felt like chaos began to cohere. Suddenly, I could feel the alchemy happening in my own body. I knew when the connection was authentic because my nervous system calmed. I knew when it was false because my body tensed. This isn't confirmation bias. It isn't simply telling myself a story. It is resonance, coherence. When the body and nervous system register peace, it's because safety is real. And when people say, you just know when it's love, it's not a metaphor, you really do know because your body knows. Energy, resonance, and neuroception. In spiritual communities, people often talk about feeling energy, about sensing someone's aura or presence. From a neuroscientific perspective, this is neuroception, the unconscious process of detecting safety or threat through subtle cues. You notice micro-expressions, tone shifts, the rhythm of someone's breathing, even the contraction of their pupils. Your body processes all this faster than your conscious mind can, and it delivers the result as a gut feeling. But in the language of spirit, it feels like resonance. You sense orbiting energies, and you feel the field between you and another. When the bond is strong, you can detect mood shifts and attention shifts without a word being spoken. This is not imagination. It is the nervous system acting as an antenna. I've experienced both sides. I've met people who loudly declared their interest, made promises, painted pictures of intimacy, but the energy never matched. And I've met people who stayed quieter, who didn't put their feelings into words, yet whose actions revealed a deeper, truer connection. In time, the silence often spoke louder than words, because my body could feel what was real. I didn't need behavioral and spoken conversation. Those who care for you will make themselves present, even if not flamboyantly showing it off. This is the gift of nervous system awareness. For decades, I couldn't explain why I felt unsettled in certain relationships, why desire dried up suddenly, why accusations of disinterest cut so deep when I knew my heart was sincere. Now, with greater clarity, I understand that my body was always tracking coherence. When words and actions aligned, I relaxed. When they diverged, tension arose. The language of projection. There's also projection. In intimacy, projection is almost inevitable. Someone accuses you of being only interested in sex, when in truth you were seeking an authentic connection. Someone doubts your fidelity when in reality you were giving your focus to self-study, growth, or your work. At the time, such accusations can feel bewildering, even cruel. But with deeper awareness, projection reveals itself. Often when someone says, you only want me for sex, what they are really confessing is, I only want you for sex and I cannot admit it. Or when someone says, you're not really interested in me, what they're exposing is their own fear of inadequacy, their inability to receive genuine care. The words don't describe you, they describe them. I've lived this. As previously discussed, I have been accused of being a player or recently a manipulator simply for carrying self-confidence, my own self-love, or being egotistical, for being at ease in my own body, for knowing who I desire and who I do not. In truth, I was seeking connection, sometimes deep, sometimes slow, always authentic. But others saw me through the distorted lens of their past betrayals. One partner, still carrying the pain of a marriage breakdown years earlier, could never quite believe my devotion. Hours spent in solitude, researching, writing, building my work, were read not as commitment, but as secrecy, as betrayal. That projection eroded trust, not because I was guilty, but because they could not imagine love without abandonment. Orbiters and the dynamics of attraction. In some communities, particularly online, people talk about orbiters, about alpha, beta, sigma dynamics. Often these terms are weaponized, stripped of nuance, turned into hierarchies that demean rather than enlighten. And yet, buried within them, there is a fragment of truth. Orbiters are those who linger in proximity, waiting for a chance at intimacy without fully stepping into authenticity. Alphas are seen as dominant, charismatic, commanding attention. Betas are read as safe, loyal, supportive. Sigmas are independent, outside the hierarchy, mysterious. I've lived through encounters with each of these dynamics. At first, those encounters felt confusing, even painful. Why did people seem to treat me differently depending on the role they imagined me playing? Why did attraction sometimes erupt suddenly, only to collapse under false pretenses? But after my awakening, I could no longer unsee it. What once felt random now showed itself as a pattern. I began to recognize that these dynamics were not about my essence, but about the projections others cast upon me. To some, I was the safe supporter. To others, the charismatic threat. To others, the one who wouldn't play the game. And what mattered was not their label, but my clarity. I could feel in my body whether their perception resonated with truth. This is the nuance. These categories are not absolute truths. They are stories people tell to explain behavior, and yet they illuminate something real about the strategies people use to navigate intimacy. For me, the resonance lay not in the categories themselves, but in the coherence I felt when attraction was authentic. When someone's energy aligned with their actions, when the bond was genuine, I knew it, and when it didn't, my body knew that too. Masculinity, femininity, and nervous system security. What gives me security today is not whether someone calls themselves alpha or beta, masculine or feminine. It is whether my nervous system feels calm in their presence. This is what spiritual traditions have always known. The union of masculine and feminine, of Shiva and Shakti, is not about performance. It is about resonance. When I sense that bond, when I can feel the orbiting energy of another, when mood and attention align, my body settles. Words may still be lacking, stories may still be messy, but the nervous system doesn't lie. This coherence, this calm, is what I had been searching for all along, and now when I experience it, I recognize it as truth. To live in this awareness is to live more gently. I no longer chase connections in the abstract. I no longer override my body's signals in the hope that someone will one day see me clearly. I honor what I feel, I act in real time, and I accept that not every bond will be reciprocated, not every attraction fulfilled. But when it is real, when love arrives clothed in resonance, I know it. Not because of words or categories, but because my body at last feels peace. Practices for partners. If intimacy is where the nervous system meets another nervous system, and sexual connection is one of the most powerful and vulnerable spaces we can enter with another person. It is not simply about bodies touching or about the psychological story of desire. It is about two whole histories meeting, two nervous systems scanning for safety, resonance, or danger, and two souls trying to find a rhythm together. And yet, most of us were never taught how to recognize the signals of the body during sex and love. We were taught scripts, performance, conquest, compliance, but not presence. We were told to push through discomfort, to prioritize pleasure, or to follow cultural expectations. What we weren't told is that the nervous system carries its own language, and when ignored, it can lead to rupture, withdrawal, or even trauma. So if intimacy is to be reclaimed as a space of safety, presence, and love, then both partners must learn practices that honor the body. Practices that can notice when dissociation begins, that can regulate the nervous system together, that can transform sex from a performance into a sanctuary. Consent as nervous system regulation. The word consent is often reduced to a legal or ethical checkbox, yes or no. But on a deeper level, consent is a nervous system process. When someone feels safe, the body opens. Muscles soften, breath slows, oxygen flows. When someone feels unsafe, even if they say yes, the body tightens. The vagus nerve retreats into defense, cortisol rises, and arousal collapses. A true yes is not just verbal, it is embodied. And so, one of the most powerful practices for partners is learning to track the difference. Asking, does my partner's body look relaxed? Is their breath easy? Do they feel present or distant? If the signs point to withdrawal, the most loving act is to pause. Consent is not a contract signed once. It is a living dialogue, renewed moment by moment. Each kiss, each touch, each progression of intimacy is an opportunity to check. Is this welcome? Is this safe? That doesn't mean sex becomes clinical. It means it becomes alive, attuned, deeply caring. Curiosity is medicine. Another key practice is curiosity. Too often, intimacy is approached with assumptions that a partner will want what they wanted last time, that they will respond how others have responded, and that there is a normal way to do things. But intimacy is a living event, and every moment is new. Curiosity shifts the energy. Instead of assuming, you ask, what do you like right now? What feels good in your body today? Or even, would you like to pause? Would you like to try something slower? Curiosity creates permission. It tells the nervous system, I don't need you to be anything other than what you are. And that allows the body to relax into authenticity. Safe words, pauses, and repair. In some traditions, safe words are associated with kink communities. But at their heart, they are about nervous system safety. A safe word permits one to stop without fear of rejection or conflict. It's a signal that bypasses shame, a way to communicate when words might be hard to find. But beyond safe words, partners can also agree on the practice of pausing. Pausing is not failure, it is wisdom. If one person begins to dissociate, to feel numb, to leave their body, pausing allows presence to return. You can take a breath together, drink water, or even just hold one another without expectation. repair is equally vital. If a rupture happens, if one person feels pushed, if tension arises, if shame enters, the worst thing to do is to bury it. Repair means naming what happened gently, acknowledging impact, and creating safety for the future. Repair teaches the nervous system that intimacy can survive missteps, that it does not require perfection to remain whole. Recognizing dissociation in a partner. One of the hardest but most loving practices is learning to recognize dissociation in a partner. Dissociation can look subtle. A blank stare, delayed responses, shallow breathing, sudden silence. To the untrained eye, it might even look like relaxation. But in truth, the person may have left, their body present, but their mind elsewhere. The worst mistake in such a moment is to keep going, to assume everything is fine. The most healing act is to notice, to stop, and to gently check in. Are you here with me? Do you need to pause? When dissociation is acknowledged rather than ignored, it loses its grip. The nervous system learns that safety exists not only in arousal, but also in slowing down, in being seen. This alone can be profoundly healing. Intimacy beyond words. For survivors of trauma, words sometimes fail. A person may not be able to explain why they feel tense, why arousal has vanished, or why they suddenly need to turn away. In such moments, words can even feel like an extra burden, one more demand when the nervous system is already overwhelmed. This is why intimacy must expand beyond language. Touch, eye contact, breath, and silence can carry meaning. A gentle hand held without pressure can say more than 1,000 words. A shared breath can regulate two nervous systems without a single word spoken. The body knows safety before the mind does. And so, to create healing intimacy, partners must learn to listen with more than their ears. My reflections, intimacy as sanctuary. In my own journey, I have seen how vital these practices are. I have been in relationships where projection clouded everything, where my solitude, my work, my research were read as betrayal, where accusations of dishonesty cut into my integrity. I have also been in moments of intimacy where words spoken in the wrong tone or accusations made at the wrong time shattered desire instantly. In those moments, my body withdrew, and all I wanted was distant silence and sleep. To continue would have been to betray myself. And so I stopped, even if I couldn't explain why in full. At the time, that was read as rejection, as coldness. But in truth, it was survival. My nervous system refusing to cross a boundary it could not sustain. Over time, through self-awareness and healing, I learned not to see these moments as weakness. I began to understand them as the body's wisdom. I also began to notice patterns, how often people projected their own intentions onto me, how often accusations revealed more about the accuser than about me. With awareness, I learned to trust my body, to say no in real time, and to refuse cycles that once would have consumed me. Now intimacy feels different. It feels like a sanctuary, not because it is perfect or easy, but because I know my body's signals and I respect them. And because I can now meet a partner not with fear of rejection, but with curiosity and presence. Why this matters, the nervous system does not lie. It tells the truth about whether intimacy is safe or not. If we override it, we risk repeating trauma, deepening shame, and eroding trust. But if we listen, if we honor consent as embodied, practice curiosity, pause and repair, and recognize dissociation, then intimacy can transform. Partners who learn these practices do more than improve sex. They build a culture of trust, presence, and healing. They teach the body that love is not dangerous, that pleasure does not collapse, that intimacy can be both vulnerable and safe. And perhaps most importantly, they show that sex and love are not performances to be perfected, but sanctuaries to be inhabited. Final thoughts. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to pause with you in the quiet place that lingers after intimacy has been explored, after truths have been spoken, after stories have been shared. The nervous system, as we've seen, is not simply an engine of survival. It is also the most intimate storyteller of our lives. It carries the memory of danger, yes, but it also carries the memory of safety, tenderness, and the possibility of connection. When we step into intimacy, we are not stepping into something neutral. We are entering the most delicate, powerful dialogue two nervous systems can have. This is why sex, love, and embodiment are never just physical. They are layers of memory, biology, energy, and soul converging in one place. And when we ignore that reality, when we reduce intimacy to performance or expectation, we betray both ourselves and the other. Throughout this episode, we've explored how the nervous system navigates intimacy. We've looked at the biology of arousal and safety, how dopamine, oxytocin, norepinephrine, and the vagus nerve coordinate to create not only pleasure but trust. We've seen how trauma can intrude, how shame and dissociation can silence the body's voice, leaving us present in form but absent in essence. We've reflected on how attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, fearful, secure, weave themselves into our sexual patterns, shaping whether intimacy feels like safety or like threat. We've gone deeper into the personal journey, my own experiences of withdrawal when words cut through desire, of recognizing projection for what it was, of learning to trust that when my body said stop, it was telling me the truth. Those moments were once painful, misunderstood, and even shaming, but they became teachers. They revealed that intimacy could only be whole when it honored presence, not performance. We explored the double bind of pleasure and pain, how survivors of trauma often feel love and danger entangled, how arousal can collapse when the nervous system is triggered, how shame can return like an old ghost at the very moment connection is most needed. And yet we saw too that this is not the end of the story. With awareness, with practices, with patience, the body can be reclaimed. Intimacy can become not a site of re-traumatization, but a site of profound healing. The practices we discussed were not abstract. Consent as embodied, curiosity as medicine, safe words and pauses as rituals of respect, repair as a nervous system balm, these are tools of transformation. And they remind us of something simple but radical, that intimacy thrives not when we deny rupture, but when we learn how to respond to it with compassion. But intimacy is not only about two individuals. It is also cultural, spiritual, and collective. We touched on Tantra, Taoism, and indigenous traditions that treat sexuality as sacred, as an act of divine union, not merely personal pleasure. These perspectives remind us that intimacy is bigger than us, that when we touch another, we are touching something ancestral, cosmic, eternal. And they challenge us to step out of the narrow distortions of pornography, performance, and repression, and instead to step into reverence. In many ways, what we've explored here is a form of reclamation. Reclaiming intimacy as a space where the nervous system can feel safe enough to stay present. Reclaiming sexuality as a place of truth, not shame. Reclaiming connection as a sanctuary, not a battlefield. The thread of my own journey, I want to bring this reflection back to the personal, because everything I share here comes not only from study and theory, but from lived experience. For much of my life, intimacy was a space of confusion. I wanted connection, but I found myself entangled in cycles of projection, misunderstanding, and pain. I wanted authenticity, but I often ignored my body's truth to preserve someone else's comfort. I can see now how costly that was. Ignoring the body's no, dismissing the nervous system's signals, pretending safety when I felt danger. Each of these was a small betrayal of myself. And each betrayal compounded, creating a distance from who I really was. But my awakening shifted this. When I began to listen to the subtle cues, the tightening in my chest, the fading of desire when words wounded, the way projection revealed more about the other than about me, I began to trust myself. And that changed everything. Today, intimacy feels different. I don't seek perfection, and I don't pretend that healing makes me immune to pain. But I do know this, when I honor my body's signals, I honor myself. When I slow down and stay present, intimacy becomes not just tolerable, but transformative. It becomes a place where healing happens, where love deepens, where the nervous system learns that safety is possible. And perhaps most importantly, I know now that what we embody, we also transmit. My own healing is not only for me. Through mirror neurons, through energy, through presence, it ripples outward. When I stay grounded, when I embody self-respect, when I honor my limits, I offer that safety to others. And that in turn creates the possibility of genuine intimacy, one that is not based on illusion or projection, but on truth. As we close this episode, I want to point to where we are going next, because the story of intimacy is not only about presence and love. It is also about power. It is about the ways intimacy can be corrupted, manipulated, and weaponized. In the next episode, The Body Knows, episode 25, Power, Control, and Coercion, we will step into the darker side of intimacy. We'll explore how abusers exploit the nervous system through charm, withdrawal, and re-engagement cycles. We'll look at how gaslighting, love bombing, and trauma bonding turn love into a trap. And we'll ask what it means to recognize these dynamics not only in relationships, but in culture, in politics, even in entire societies. If this episode has shown us the possibility of intimacy as sanctuary, the next will show us how easily that sanctuary can be violated, and why awareness is the first step in reclaiming our power. So let us carry forward what we've uncovered here. That intimacy is not performance, but presence. The nervous system holds the key to whether love feels like safety or like danger, that our bodies are not obstacles to overcome, but guides to trust. If you take one thing with you, let it be this: your body tells the truth. If it tightens, pauses, or withdraws, it is not betraying you, it is protecting you. And if it softens, opens, and stays, it is not a weakness, it is a profound act of trust. This is the real gift of intimacy. Not that it is always easy, but that it is always an invitation to know ourselves more deeply, to connect more honestly, and to love more fully. Until next time, I hope this episode offered not only insight, but also compassion for yourself, for others, and for the delicate, resilient body that carries you. You've been listening to The Body Knows, James Miller.